Good morning, everyone from Sydney. I'm Sam Ngô from Some Product. Let me introduce you to Celia Alves. She is an Excel business solution developer certified by Microsoft as Excel expert, currently working as a senior business analyst for a leading Canadian company in the transportation and logistics business areas. She loves to design and build solutions combine Excel VBA, Power Query, and Power Pivot to automate tasks, analyze data, and model business process. With an academic background in mathematics and education and 20 years of experience as high school mathematics teacher, Celia combined her passion for teaching with her Excel knowledge to offer free tutorial on YouTube and a training program to help professionals automate their Excel recurring tasks. Celia also a speaker and a founder and leader of Microsoft Excel Toronto Meetup Group. For her contribution to the community, she was awarded MVP by Microsoft in 2020 and every year after that. So today she will present to us the spill effect and can't live without it.
Hello and welcome to the Excel Virtually Global 2023, and thank you for attending this session. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Sun Product team for inviting and for organizing this awesome event. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is CELIA Alves. I am a certified Microsoft Excel expert. I've been working for the past 8 years as a business solutions developer, creating custom solutions in Excel for a variety of companies in different industries. My academic background started in Portugal. I studied mathematics and education. In 2013, I moved to Canada and I created a new career. At some point, I discovered the potential of Excel and the demand for the Excel skills, and I ended up becoming an Excel consultant. Currently, I work as a business analyst for a transportation company. Okay, so let's go and talk about dynamic array functions. These functions exist because the Excel engine evolved, and we are going to look at the fundamental concepts about this new way of calculation in Excel. And then we will see some examples. So to set up some expectations, dynamic array functions are only available in Microsoft 365 subscriptions and in Excel 2021. This demonstration will be made using Microsoft 365 in the beta channel. Dynamic arrays require a new way of thinking. At the beginning, you can expect some challenges with adapting to this new way of creating models in Excel with the new functions. Each new function requires time to learn in depth, and today we are not going to cover all the dynamic array functions one by one. We are just looking at some examples, looking at the basics first, and then looking at some examples. So what are dynamic array functions? When we look into the Microsoft page for this topic, it was not really clear for me what they meant by dynamic array functions. I'll leave the definition here for you that you can read later because this deck of slides will be available for you. And instead we will go through the basics and I will indicate what my definition of dynamic array functions is. Let's talk about the spilling and the lifting behaviors. So in the modern Excel versions like Microsoft 365, Excel 2021, Excel for the web, and Excel for mobile devices, we can find a new way of calculating Excel and evaluate functions that use spilling behavior. The spilling behavior is what happens when a function that generates multiple results, so instead of generating one unique value, it produces multiple values. Those values are presented in multiple cells, spilling from the cell where the formula is created. We will see in a minute what I mean with this. So dynamic array functions for me are the functions in Excel that were created to take advantage of the spilling behavior, like the unique function, sort, filter, text split, and many others. But the truth is that all the other functions that already existed before the spilling behavior was introduced in Excel, they can leverage the new way of calculating in Excel and produce spilled arrays as well. So we will see in a minute an example with the function SUMIF, the function VLOOKUP. These are very well-known functions that are supposed to generate one unique result, but we will see that we can take advantage of this new spilling behavior in Excel and produce multiple results with these classic functions. So a dynamic array will be the array spilled by a function. So let's see some examples. And just before that, I'm going to make a note that I may say Excel function, I may say Excel formula. For the purpose of this presentation, these two expressions will mean the same, although they are not the same thing. Okay, so we are here in Excel. What does it mean, spilling behavior? Spill behavior, what is that? So if I type in equal and I point to one cell only, I will get the value in that cell, of course. What happens if instead of pointing to one cell, I point to multiple cells? I get all the values that I have in those cells. Before this way of calculating in Excel, we would only get in this cell the first value, in this case apples, and then to have the other values below, we would have to use Control-Shift-Enter when committing the formula, and we would have also to duplicate the formula down as many cells as we would need. So that was the old way of working. We don't need that anymore. If a function is returning multiple values or a formula is returning multiple values, we will get all those values spilled down and possibly to the right according to what the result is. So after this type of calculation was created, some functions were created to take advantage of it. The unique function is one of those functions. So if I type in unique and say, give me the unique list of values in that range before to be 10, we now get that list, apples, grapes, and oranges. Because some of the values appear repeated, we only get one time each one of the values. Let me move this up here. Other things to notice here. One is this blue line that you see. It indicates the range that is being occupied by the formula in that cell. And if we move down, we see that the formula appears grayed out. So if I try to edit the formula here, nothing is in that cell. And if I try to type something in there, I will get the spill error there, indicating that the function or the formula in that cell is wanting to spill a set of results, but it's not being able because something is in the way. So we can either delete or move this out of the way, and then the function will be able to spill all the results. If we happen to, in this range, have another value, for example, let's say we have bananas here, immediately we get one more value in the dynamic array that is the result of this formula here. So what about all the other functions that already existed before this way of calculating in Excel? For example, the SUMIF function. If we type SUMIF S and say, give me the sum of the quantities where in this range the values coincide with this value, apples, we get the result. 142 is the result of summing 63 plus 79. What if instead of pointing to E4 only, we point to all the results that we got here in this spilled array? Notice that now we got a hashtag at the end of E4. This hashtag was added automatically because I am referring to all the results of the formula that exists in E4. So we are referring to the dynamic array resulting from the formula in E4. And what this does is that instead of getting one result only, we get another array of results. And what the SUMIFs function is doing here is taking advantage of the lifting behavior, let's say like that, when calculating with dynamic arrays. So what it's doing is applying the SUMIFs function, but for this argument here, where we usually would enter one unique value, since we are feeding into this argument multiple values, the SUMIFs function is calculating as many times as values we are providing. So if we are providing 1, 2, 3, 4 values, the SUMIFs function is calculating 4 times, 1 time for apples, 1 time for grapes, 1 time for bananas, and 1 time for oranges, producing 4 results according to those values. And that's what we have here. So this now allows us to solve problems in different ways, solve problems in an easier ways in most of the cases, and avoid errors, because in this case, for the 8 values that we have here, we only typed a formula into cells. So we have less formulas to type in, and with that, possibly less errors will occur. The interesting thing is that all this is dynamic, as you've seen with the example of when I entered bananas here. If we enter a new value here, let's say oranges, that currently says 67, if I add 10 more here, nothing happened because, of course, we did not update the range that we want to refer to. So for this, what I always recommend is to use tables as much as possible. When you have data organized in rows and columns and you want to summarize that data with different functions, it's always best to have that formatted as a table. So that's what we are going to do here. So coming to insert, choose table. My table has headers, okay. And so let's call this data. So now if I adjust my formula here to give me the unique list of values in the product column in the data tab, this will be dynamic. And we can do the same, we should do the same here. Adjust the range, the fixed range, to be the name of the table and the column. So the first column here is the sum range, is the column quantity, and the second column, the column for the criteria, is the column product. And the rest can be the same. Enter. So the advantage of this is that now if I add a new value here, let's say pears 50, we get a new value added to our dynamic array result. Okay, so always use tables if you can in situations similar to this one. So the idea with this little example here was to make you aware that now any function that you already knew before the new capabilities to calculate with dynamic arrays, they can potentially become generators of dynamic arrays. Not all functions though. For example, if we use the sum function, the sum function is a function that expects multiple values as argument. So whatever I give it to sum, the result will always be one unique value. It will never spill multiple values. Okay, so let's see some more examples so that we understand what changes with the spill behavior. Let's use the VLOOKUP function as an example. When we look at the arguments of this function, we know that we need to provide a lookup value that we can say it's a scalar argument because it's just one unique value. A table array that is a multi-argument, meaning that it expects multiple values in this argument. Then the column index that we want to return from after doing the lookup it again is by default a scalar value, one unique value. And finally, we can indicate which type of lookup we want to do, an exact match or an approximate match, and that is by tradition one unique value that we enter there, a scalar value. So let's imagine we have this little set of information, of data like we have here. And let's do some experiments. What happens if in the VLOOKUP formula, in the first argument, instead of entering just one unique value, I enter multiple values? What happens if I go VLOOKUP and instead of pointing to this value only, I point to two values and say, look up those two values where in my table and deliver the second column for the author. And let's use false for an exact match. Now we get VLOOKUP to generate multiple results according to multiple lookup values. So that's really interesting. So now let's test the other arguments. Now I'm going to start by looking up one unique value only for now. So look up one value, the one in I7, and look for it in the table and return the, instead of saying return the second column, let's say return the second and the third column. And for that we can use the curly brackets. And finally the last argument, let's continue with false. So now, because we fed two column indexes here, we get two results, this time spilled across the columns. And that is because we used a comma as a separator in that array here. If we use semicolon, we will get the results spilled vertically because the semicolon separates rows and the comma separates columns. Let me do Ctrl Z to undo. So now ideally we would like to be able to feed multiple values in multiple parameters. So I applied two values in the column index argument that usually only takes one unique value. What happens if I also feed multiple values to the lookup argument, the first argument? So instead of saying lookup for I7, what if I say lookup for I7 and I8? Unfortunately, we do not get the expected result, because when we try to feed multiple arrays to multiple arguments, to more than one argument that usually would take one unique value, in most cases we will get something like this or an error, because we are asking Excel to deal with an array of arrays, and Excel does not have that capability. Okay, so in that case I'm going to do Ctrl Z. In that case, unfortunately, this is not totally dynamic, and we would have to copy the formula down as many times as we think we need the formula to go down. Let's see one more example. What if we apply multiple values to the last argument where we are supposed to say true and false or 1 and 0? If I say VLOOKUP this value in this table, return the second column, but now give me both true and false, or false and true. 0 for false, 1 for true. So 0 is the exact match and 1 is the true match. Interestingly, we get the result here. In this case, both coincide because alongside a spring is a title that exists here. So both the exact and the approximate lookups are the same. But if we copy the formula down, we get the error not available for when we look for an exact match, because her, the title her, does not exist here. But if we look for an approximate match, this is sorted alphabetically, so the approximate match will be the immediate title above, and the result will be Clarissa Oswald. Interestingly, in this case, let me remove the formula here. In this case, it does allow us to feed multiple values into arguments. So if I point to these two titles, so I'm feeding two lookup values that usually for this formula would be one unique value, and I'm feeding two types of lookups at the end, 0 and 1. So in this case, it does work, which is interesting. I'm not sure why, but it's interesting to have these possibilities in mind. The dynamic array functions, those functions that were created by the Excel team to already take advantage of the new calculation engine, are the ones that we see here: filter, unique, sort, etc. These first 6 functions were the first ones to appear. Then we got 14 other functions, and somewhere in between we got the lambda function, the let function, and these other 7 functions that are called lambda helper functions. They only work if we provide them with a lambda function. Our focus today will not be to explain how these functions work, but we will see some examples for some of the functions mentioned here. Okay, so let's see some of those examples. I'm going to show you a series of examples all related to drop-down lists. Drop-down lists, I don't know for you, but for me, the need to use them occurs very frequently in different scenarios. And depending on the scenarios, the needs for those drop-down lists are also different. So let's see some examples. Simple drop-down list is the first example. And in here, I have a drop-down list that gives me the unique list of options that come in this data set. So if I add a new name here, let's say N20 here, we will see that N also appears now here. And not only that, it appears in the correct spot to have this list alphabetically sorted. And if I select that name, I get here the result of the SUMIF for criteria N. How is this set up? Here on the right side, it could be on a separate sheet. We have a function, unique and sort. So all I did here was give me the unique list of names here. And then I also used another dynamic array function, the sort function, and said, give me this list sorted. And by default, if I do not use any of the other arguments, and by the way, most of these functions that I'm using as an example today, they have multiple arguments that lead to even more possibilities, but we will not be exploring all those in detail today. So if I say now sort the unique list, we get this sorted alphabetically. And now I have my drop-down list here that is dynamic as I add more names or more values to my data set that again is in an Excel table. And that's what allows us to get even better and more dynamic solutions. The data validation here, I did not show you. If you come to data and then go to data validation, we see that data validation is pointing to cell H3 where we entered the combination of sort with unique, and by adding an hash sign at the end, it will again indicate, consider everything that is resulting from the formula that is entered in the cell H3. Okay, so that's the whole trick going on here. So this is a simple example. Let's see other examples related to drop-down lists. In this case, I want to have a drop-down that combines the names existing in 2 different tables. So it's similar to what we already saw with the VLOOKUP function. Here, I only have to use the vstack function and say stack vertically the column name in the table for the team A with the name column for team B. By doing that, every time we add a new name, let's do n again, immediately we get n here as the last value in table A. We could also use sort here if we wanted to get the names from both tables sorted alphabetically and be easier to find them when someone is entering a value here. And then here we have an if function saying if it's empty on the left, just give us empty. Otherwise, look up for the value in H5. And in this case, I am using XLOOKUP instead of VLOOKUP. So I get to give the column where to look. It's the result of combining vertically the two column name in the two tables. And then the result I want to generate comes from the combination of stacking vertically column score in the first table with column score in the second table. And then I can say name not found as an argument if nothing was found. Okay, so that's what we have here in this example. Again, the data validation, similar to the previous example, is pointing to the combined lists. This is the name of a cell, and then by putting a hash sign at the end, I'm again saying consider all the values that we have resulting from the formula entered in cell combined lists. So combined lists is the name of this cell. If we look here in the name box, that's the name I gave to that unique cell L5. Another example. In this case here, let's imagine we have this master list in one sheet, and this would be the input that could be in a separate sheet. And we have a list of different continents and countries in those continents. And to facilitate data entry, we created a new column here that contains a function that, let me do here, just put it gray to say that this is a formula here. We are using text join to combine the values in the first cell to the left with the second cell. Now I will use this column to be the source column for data validation here. So what I did here was I selected the entire column and went to data and data validation, and I'm using D5 to D16, so the third column here in our master list, as the source for the data validation here. And now, because we also have autocomplete, I can say Europe, and immediately we get only the values that contain Europe in our source for our dropdown. And we can say Portugal, and immediately we get both continent and country entered with one go. This example, I have to give a shout out to David Benheim. I learned it from him a long time ago. I think it's brilliant. So what I'm using here is the function text before to read from this cell, the cell select, and give the result, the text, extract the text before the delimiter that we have separating the continent from the country. So it's space, greater than sign, and then space again. That's the delimiter there. And in here, I'm using another of the modern dynamic array functions, that is the text after function. So now, for example, let's say I'm typing Spain. In one go, I get both the continent and the country filled in the two columns to the right. So this is using text before and text after. Let's group just to close them there. Let's open the second set. What if we wanted to use the text split dynamic array function that we also have available? So instead of typing into formulas, I could have thought, well, why not to use the text split to give me two pieces of text before and after the delimiter? This would work had we not been in an Excel table. So it's not working here because it wants to spill in multiple cells of the table, and unfortunately dynamic arrays will not spill through cells that belong to tables. So in this case, we would have to select the table, come to the table design column, and convert to range, which is what I did here. So if I click here, you see that now I don't get the table tab here at the table design tab at the top. So this is just a cell range. I have the same drop down menu here. And now in this cell, I have the formula text split. I'm saying if this cell here to the left N5 is empty, give me empty. Otherwise, text split by the delimiter space greater than space. And in this case, we have one delimiter. We will get two pieces of text, so it spills to the right using two cells. And so that's it. So let's say if we say Germany, if we say Canada, immediately we get the two results there. I think this is brilliant and very easy to implement. Another example of drop-down lists here is when I have a list of values, in this case names, and I want to have multiple drop-down lists that use those same names, but not always the complete list of these names. Let's say in this case I have a list of sales reps, and I want to select different names for our different days of the week. So I simply used an X character in the cells that I want to consider, in the names that I want to consider for each day. Here I created the lists for the drop-downs. Again, this could be in separate sheets. And what I have here is I'm using a filter function, which is another dynamic array function. And I'm saying filter the, let me do this one for you. I'm saying filter the list of sales reps, and in this case I'm saying for Monday, give me all the names, filter all the names where in column Monday we get a X mark. Okay, close parentheses, enter. So this gives me the list of names for Monday. If I add a new name for Monday like Kelvin, it will be added here, and it will be available here on Monday. If I remove Kelvin, no longer the name is available here. So this is very helpful because it will avoid errors when selecting names for each one of the days of the week. The list for Tuesday will be the list that we created here. It's exactly the same, except that in my formula, instead of pointing to column Monday, I point to column Tuesday, and then I do the same for all the other columns. The data validation here is using the indirect function, and I am saying look for the name that we have in cell I4. So I have Monday, so this means that the list is named Monday. So I had to create separate lists in my name manager. So by going to formulas, name manager, if I look for Monday, I have a named range here, Monday, and that name is pointing to cell B13 in this sheet, overlapping lists, and then because I add the hash sign at the end, the name is considering all the results of the formula placed in B13. So in this case, it's giving me two names. Okay, so this is another way of using dynamic array functions in combination with Excel tables, in combination with named ranges, and data validation to create these drop-down menus that become so easy to use, and they make the user's life much easier when entering data and helping them avoid data entry errors. The dependent drop-downs This is a more complex one. I'm just going to show you that it works. And if you are interested in knowing how to put this together, I have a number of resources on the PDF that I'm going to provide for this session. And you can watch an entire video explaining how this works. What this does here is I have a master list, again, with continents and countries in those continents. And depending on the country that I choose on the left, the second column will have a dependent drop-down list based on what I have on the left. So if I choose Africa, I will only see here the African countries that show in my master list here on the left. And to drive the drop-down menus here, we have these helper functions here. We have first a unique list of the continents sorted alphabetically. So we are using the unique and sort function again. And in here, we are filtering the second column according to, let me double click here. We are filtering the second column where we have subcategories. So in this case, it will be country names according to the value in the first, on the left, with the value on the left, cell 04 in this case. And then we transpose, we are using transpose. We could also use the toCall, which is another dynamic array function, to get the results spilling horizontally. And then in this case, because of that issue of not being able to work with arrays of arrays, I had to copy the formula down. And then I have a number of other strategies put together here to make this work. And again, you can watch that video. But just for dependent drop-downs, dynamic arrays make our life so much easier and so much more fun to work now with Excel with these new possibilities. Okay, 2 more examples to go. I wanted to give a shout out to the sequence function, which can do so many different and interesting things as well. I mean, all the dynamic array functions are fabulous. Here's a very simple example. Let's say we have a data set with dates and amounts, and I want to create a report. Let's say these are sales, and I want to get a report of the last 3 days of sales. So in here, I'm going to indicate horizontally the dates I want to refer to, and then here I'm going to put in the amount. So I'm going to say, give me the sequence of dates in rows. How many rows? 1, because I just want 1 row across the different columns. Columns, I could type in manually how many columns. In this case, I'm going to point to this cell to give the user the ability to indicate how many days the user wants to include in the report. And I want to start with yesterday. So let's say today value -1. And I want to go in steps of 1 day, 1 by 1, but backwards. So in this case, I will put -1. Enter. So because today is October the 8th, it's giving me 7, 6, and 5. And because I said 3 days, I have those 3 dates. But if I say I want a report for the last 7 days, I will get all the dates indicated here. And now I can simply say SUMIF, as we already did before, SUMIF, in fact SUMIFS. The range to sum is this column amount. The criteria is the column, the criteria range is the column with the dates, and I want each one of the dates that are indicated here in the spilled array resulting from the formula entered in cell E3. So I'm going to say E3 and then # to consider all the values generated from the cell E3. Close parentheses, enter. And there we go. As you see here, the $ and the 2 decimal places are not coming through. The dynamic array functions, unfortunately, do not carry over cell formatting. So I would have, I'm considering that my report can go up to 14 days, I will have to format these cells according to my needs. So let's say I'm using the currency number format. And if I say, oh, give me the 10 past days, I will get my list extended, going backwards from yesterday, 10 days before that. And finally, I'm going to show you one example here, not explaining all the steps because it would take us too much time, but just so that you have one more idea of the possibilities. In this case, I have here on the left a simplified version of an invoice template. This came from an actual project of mine. And in here, I have a table that would be on a separate sheet where the user will have a list of clients and different types of expenses. In this case, we have 4 expenses, and the user will input the value, the monthly value that is charging to each one of the clients according to the services that those clients are using. Usually, we would want our data in a tabular layout. So for example, if I have 2 services for Alex, I would have Alex and then email to indicate the name of the service and then the value 50, and then another row with Alex again, and then the name of the service, social media, and then the value 500 as we have here. It happens that can be difficult for the user to manage, because the idea here is that the user will be able to add more categories of expenses, and then it will be difficult to track how many categories each one of the clients needs to have if we have to repeat the name of the client multiple times. And in this invoice, I have 2 categories. One here are the other expenses that are entered manually every month in this table. So let's say for this particular person that now I'm selecting as being Hashtin, I would have no particular expenses, so here will show 0. But in what I want to show you is this piece here on the left. So I want the recurring expenses that are mentioned in this table to automatically populate here as we choose in the drop down a different name. So if I choose Alex, we will see 50 and 500 showing for email and social media as we see there in the table. This is almost like unpivoting, using unpivot in Power Query. So I could have used Power Query to unpivot this data, but then it will require the client to refresh, right? The client could forget and then it would generate a wrong invoice for that name. So in scenarios like this one, where we prefer not having to refresh manually, using dynamic array functions can be one of the possible solutions. Of course, VBA would be another solution. Dynamic arrays here is what I used. So the function is quite extensive. I'm not going to explain all the steps, but here is a high-level explanation. So first, I filter the table with the expenses by the name that is entered selected in cell B2. With that, I get one unique row. In case the name is not found, I need to have an array, and that's what this makeArray function is doing here. Then I stack that row resulting from filter function with the column headers. That's what we have here. I stack them vertically. Then here I use the drop function to drop the first column because I do not need the column with the client name. I already know the client name, and I drop the first column. Then I transpose the result of that, meaning that the names of the expenses will become in the first column instead of the first row. And then, because I don't want to be showing expenses that do not make sense for that particular client, if the client does not require that service, I am filtering again. So I'm saying, let the data be what we got so far, and then filter the data by the values column The values column is the second column. I'm using the function choose_calls, which is another dynamic array function. The second column, go through the second column, and if you find zeros, filter those rows out. And the no expenses row variable that I have here is another make array function, just to generate a valid result in case the filter generates no results. So it might sound confusing and difficult. This is where you can get once you start using these dynamic array functions and imagining the multiple possibilities that these functions give you. So enter. That's it. That's what it's doing. So for example, Gracie only has one expense for social media. That's what shows there. If, let's say, I add a new expense, let's just call it like that, a new column here, and I say that Gracie has $200 value for that new category, you see that it immediately shows there. If I choose Dylan, who currently has no values in his row, is not subscribing any of these services, I will get no recurring expenses, 0, and this is what is provided by the no expenses row here. So this make array is generating this array, no recurring expenses in the first cell and a 0 in the second cell. So I just wanted to share how easy and fun dynamic array functions in Excel have made my life lately, and I hope they can make the same for you. So these are the examples I had for you today. I hope they were interesting enough. Like I mentioned, I have a list of resources for the dependent drop-down lists example. A few things to take note of regarding dynamic arrays, pros and cons. The dynamic array functions, they work in Excel Online and mobile versions, which is great. I have some solutions working where I can simply update a data set from my phone. So I am listing the pros now. Using dynamic array functions potentially will reduce the number of errors we may have when comparing to the old ways of working with the classic formulas and functions. Unlike Power Query and pivot tables, dynamic arrays update immediately, so they do not need us to refresh manually, and make problems much easier to solve. And it's a lot of fun to work with them, at least I find that. As cons, they are not an option for workbooks that need to work on older versions of Excel. So of course, if you need to share your workbook with someone who does not have Excel for Office 2021 or Microsoft 365, these will not work for them. Dynamic array functions cannot be used in tables in most cases. Formatting is not transferred over from the data to the result of the function. They do not support links between workbooks unless both are open. I have some more resources here included in this deck that you can look on your own time later. Some more resources, and that's it. Thank you for attending the session today. As a thank you gesture for all the attendees of this event, if you are interested in considering my training about automation of Excel reporting procedures, take a look at my training. There's 20% off going on until the end of the month. Take a picture. You can find it in my shared file as well. Files will be shared as well with this PDF. Here is my contact information. Feel free to take a picture as well. And subscribe to my newsletter if you want to keep updated with all the new functionality available in Excel once a month. And please fill in the evaluation about this session. I would love to hear from you and hear your thoughts about the value that you might have received from my presentation today. It was a pleasure. And finally, Microsoft is looking for participants to help them with testing new features. So if you want to register, please fill in the form in the link on the bottom right. And that's it. Thank you again. I'll leave my contact information up for a little longer. If there are any questions and there's time for questions, I am more than happy to answer them.